the anxiety of failure is gone because they haven't set this expectation for themselves that they have to get a certain score, that they have to score a certain number of points, and so they can just let their talent and their training kind of take over. And there's something like so freeing about that. You're not worried about making sure you hit, your triple doubles. It's not, it's not that. That's not what it's about. That's not what sport is about. And so I think athletes just get to be athletes. Just like if we have an open gym and the kids just start playing, they suddenly can do way more than they can do when they're practicing, because in practice, they're worried about failing. When
Mhm.
they're at open gym, they're just having fun. They're being free.
All right, that is Aimee Boorman. Behind every great athlete and every great leader, for that matter, lies a world-class coach. Tiger Woods has a coach. Sam Altman has a coach. And yes, the greatest gymnast in the world, Simone Biles, has a coach. But Aimee is a special kind of coach. She saw something in Simone when she was just 6 years old and took her from this playful kid with tons of energy and enthusiasm and coached her all the way through her multiple world championships and her 4 gold medals at the Rio Olympic Games. Simone isn't like any other gymnast, and Aimee isn't like any other coach. Simone does things her way, and so does Aimee. Whatever you thought you knew about coaching world-class performers is about to be thrown out the window. Stick around for this one. It's a good one. Okay, my guest today is Aimee Boorman. Aimee is a decorated and globally respected gymnastics coach whose career included 12 years coaching the sport's all-time greatest, Simone Biles. She was named USA Gymnastics Coach of the Year 4 times and U.S. Olympic Committee Coach of the Year in 2016. She was the head coach of the U.S. women's gymnastics teams at the Rio Olympic Games and coached for the Dutch Gymnastics Federation in 2021, including at the Tokyo Olympic Games. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show where I interview world-class leaders and trailblazers to discover the ingredients of outsized performance. I'm Glenn Zweig, a leadership advisor and executive coach, and I'm here to help each of you unlock your own potential. That is, your own version of excellence. Okay, I think we are indeed recording. So,
Excellent.
Aimee, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thrilled to have you. So, here's where I'd like to start. You did gymnastics yourself as a kid, and you were
Correct.
pretty competitive at it. But your coach had a somewhat, and sort of your words, I think here, a cruel and unsupportive coaching style that sort of taught you what not to do when you would later become a coach down the line. Would love to hear about that experience and what is it the coach did or didn't do that wasn't the right kind of motivation and support that you needed.
So I competed in gymnastics for 12 years. I loved the sport from the moment I stepped in the gym. And as I started getting better, just from being a kid in the Park District taking some classes, my mother sought out another training facility. And that got me introduced to some new coaches. And at the beginning, it was great. And then one coach came along, and his methodology just didn't jive with me. It was a matter of he thought that if he was kind to me, that I wouldn't excel, and that it had to be like this hard knock school of coaching in order to get an athlete to excel. So there was a lot of putting down, there was a lot of stonewalling, things like that, that just kind of beat my spirit. And yeah, it never made me stop loving gymnastics, but it made me not want to be in the gym.
Hmm. It is super interesting because I kid you not, like last week, I interviewed someone who is a former principal flutist for the Boston Symphony. I mean, one of the top orchestras in the world. And at one point, when she was growing up and getting more and more proficient at it, she just about called it quits for exactly the same reason that a coach thought that she needed more discipline and more tough love and all the things that took out the joy in the pursuit of it. So that's really interesting to see the parallels with these things.
Yeah, and
So yeah,
I don't think
yeah,
that I don't think tough love should be a thing. I think that it should be
mm,
love, and then there are situations where you have to, I guess, how do I put this? There's a way of putting your foot down about how training is going without it being considered tough love. Just today in my practice, I had a situation
mm,
where my athletes were not doing what they've been training how to do, and there was this lack of connection of all these hours they've put in. And so basically, I had to call them out on it. You're working with
mm,
teenagers here. And it was more like, I see what you're doing, and I'm not going to let you do this poorly. So
mm,
step up your game because, as a coach, yes, I was irritated because we had put all of these hours into training for them to be excelling, and they just weren't producing what they knew they were capable of, and I knew what they were capable of. So it's not that every day in the gym should be sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes they do need to be called to the mat and
mm,
being held accountable for the way that they're performing. But at the end of practice, I said, hey, listen, tomorrow when we come in, hold yourself to a higher expectation. And they all smiled and nodded and said, yeah, 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 we know what you mean. So, like, they understood what they were
mm.
doing, and somebody just needed to say, hey, look, stop doing that.
Yeah. When you were, you said very competitive for like a dozen years. Were you on the Olympics track? Were you at that level?
No, no, I was
Okay.
not. I competed for 12 years out of passion, but I was very talented when I was little, and I think that the coaching that I got may have derailed that a little bit because I started not believing in myself and I built fears, and the approval that I was looking for from my coaches was never there. And
Mm,
so it did beat me down in a way that I just focused on, okay, well, I'll stop when I graduate from high school. And I didn't pursue it past high school. So I definitely wasn't on an Olympic track, but my heart was.
yeah. Yeah. So why did you end up choosing to become a coach? And would love to hear about how natural a transition that was from being this really driven performer for so many years to being a coach and focusing on others and not yourself.
Yeah, so I actually started coaching when I was 13 to help pay for my tuition because we we did not grow up. I didn't grow up well off. My mother
Hmm.
raised me by herself, and so she was working a lot, and um, she was working mostly to help pay for my gymnastics. Like that was her big thing. Obviously, she had to pay all the bills, but gymnastics is a very expensive sport. And so a lot of our money went to that. So when I was
Hmm.
old enough to start working, that was my contribution was to start coaching. And it really helped me because I could see the love that the little kids had for the sport and it helped me love it. After, I had been through some rough times, it kind of drew me back into it. And then
Hmm.
by the time I was 16, I was, running a YMCA program by myself. And then I continued coaching into college. And then that's when I decided to do it professionally.
Hmm. And maybe you already touched on some of this, but do you have like a core coaching philosophy that clearly had a lot of years to incubate inside of you, but how would you think about that today?
I think the biggest thing is that coaches have to realize that they're dealing with humans. Like athletes are humans,
Mm,
and their lives have all of these intricate parts that play into how they perform. And if you don't
mhm,
understand them and if you're not empathetic to them, you're never going to get the best out of your athlete. So, big key points for me are communication. Like, communication with your athlete is super important. And being understanding that they're a whole person and you have to coach the whole person to get the best out of the athlete.
mm. And so there's the means to the end, if you will, which is the coaching, and then there's the end, which is the performance. So there's obviously some level of just technical mastery that you need to be able to do. What else do they need to be able to do? What else are you coaching them on beyond the technical aspects of the performances?
Yeah, there's life skills are very much involved in being an elite athlete at any sport. I mean, not even an elite athlete, any athlete that's putting in, 10 or more hours per week, they have to learn time management. I already, hit on communication. They have to learn how to communicate not only with their coaches, but with their teammates, with their teachers at school, with their parents, because sometimes they'll get a lot of pressure from the parents that they're not getting in the gym. And they have a hard time saying, Mom and Dad, you're putting too much pressure on me. I need you to back off a little bit. So those kind of things are very important. And obviously, it goes without, saying that they are just being physically fit, being healthy. But again, pulling into the communication, if there's an injury or an illness that's happening and they're afraid to communicate that to their coach, then their body is going to break down faster and they're not going to be able to be that great athlete they want to be.
Hmm. In building the trust so they can be open and I guess vulnerable with you is a really important thing, I would imagine.
Yes, and I think that the way to do that is by example. Like I try to, as a coach, if I'm having a bad day and it has nothing to do with the gymnast, I'll let them know, this is my bad mood has nothing to do with you, and I'm going to try to be present for you. I'm just having other things that are going on in my life, and I'm a little distracted today. And I think that there's a lot of power in that because then they see that vulnerability, and it's not weakness, but it's showing that there's strength in saying, I'm distracted and I'm nothing that's happening here today is personal, because then they can come in when they're having a rough day and they can say the same thing. Like,
Mm,
I'm here, I'm in the gym today, I'm going to do my job to the best of my ability, but I'm not 100% today.
mm,
And then as a
mm,
coach, I know how to approach them in that training. And I think coaches who are too rigid and say, no, this is the plan for today, and this is what we're going to do. And if you don't like it, then you can get out. They're not going to get that athlete to perform for them. And they're also not going to get that athlete to trust them. And they could lead to burnout and, injury breakdown.
mm. So let's fast forward to Simone. You first set your eyes on her. I think she was 6 years old.
Correct.
She entered the gym that you were coaching at, and it seems like you immediately saw something in her that was pretty special, pretty unique. What was she doing that caught your attention, especially at that age?
So my mother had her in a class first, and
Mm,
my mom tried to get me to come and take a look at her, and I blew my mom off. I said, Mom, I'm busy. I don't have time to go look at a little recreational kid. And so it was I think it might have been the following week that I saw her, and she was just this little tiny ball of muscles and this big bright smile and this energy that was just, effervescent energy just coming off of her, bubbling off of her. And she, like one of the things that she did while I was happened to glance over at her is she was standing, just standing waiting for her turn, but not standing still because I don't think that Simone still knows how to stand still. and and she jumped and she bounced on her bottom and right back up to her feet as if she were on a trampoline, but she wasn't on a trampoline. She was just on like a 4-inch base mat that's pretty firm and just bounced right back up to her feet. And, she did a couple of other things that you just wouldn't deem as normal for an average 6-year-old to be doing.
mm. One of the so some of this just her effervescence, her energy, clearly some springiness in her body, agility. Some of this is just natural. One of the other innate talents that you mentioned, and I don't know that you saw it at this age, but at some point you did, that makes her really exceptional is she's what you call an air sense savant.
Yes.
So would love for you to unpack that term.
So while I was coaching her, I noticed that she had this obvious ability to learn skills very quickly. But
Mm,
it was more than just having the musculature to do it and the bravery to do it. It was that every time that she went up in the air, she knew exactly where the ground was. And I used to joke with her about the fact I would ask her if she like looked at the ground or if she looked at the beam or
mhm,
she looked at the bars, and she was like, "No, that's scary. I don't want to look at it. That's scary." But she
mm,
always knew where it was. And so what was great about when I was coaching her is that I think only twice in the 12 years that I coached her did I ever see her get lost in the air, like not know where she was. So that makes coaching gymnastics a lot less scary and a lot more fun because I always knew that if she wasn't going to land on her feet, she'd at least land safely. Like she knew how to get to her
Mm.
back and land safely. And so it was never scary for me. And that was
Yeah.
that was a real treat.
And we'll come back to the twisties in a minute because I do want to talk about that chapter. And I think there were a couple chapters of it with Simone. But back to this, is this just something where you're either born with or you're not? Is it something that one can learn and develop that kind of awareness, or is it really hard to do that if your brain isn't sort of brain body isn't connected in that way?
Yeah, I think that it is, at her level, it was definitely a gift that she has. I think it's
Mm.
something that you can improve on overall, just like if you train any muscle, it will get better. But I think that her level of awareness is something special. One of her more recent interviews when she was doing someone asked her about doing the triple double, which is the triple twisting double back that she does as her first line in her floor routine. And they said, "What do you see? What do you feel?" And she's like, "It's more of a sound. It's more of a whoosh that I hear in my ears that let her know exactly where she was in the flips and twists before her feet hit the floor."
Hmm. It's always fun to sort of dissect what was just naturally gifted to them, as you put it, and what was learned, studied, learn, practice, repeated, perfected, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure
Well,
there's
and I
some combination of both, yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that people will lean towards thinking that Simone just could do everything right away and that she didn't have to train. And that, yes, she's gifted, but she also trained really hard and for many, many years to make her craft what it is. Because when she was little,
Mm,
we would put her in the hot mess category. She could do a lot of
mm,
things and she was as cute as could be and she had star performance quality, but her gymnastics wasn't that pretty. So for her to
mm.
rise to be one of the top competitors in the world, not just by her difficulty, but also by how well she performed the skills, is really something exceptional.
So I know with Simone, some of the skills came pretty easily to her. Like she just got it, immediately. And others she would sort of struggle with, for a bit. I was wondering if she would get frustrated on these routines that she didn't take to right away, or the opposite, if she had the personality where she just would, double down and want to conquer it as fast as possible. Like, was it motivating or was it, flustering to her?
It was very frustrating for her when she couldn't get a
Mm,
skill very quickly. I think I talk about in the book about how she was a great teammate and everybody really liked her on the team, but they envied how quickly she learned skills. And
mm,
so I think when she struggled a little bit, everybody else in the gym was like, "Oh, wait, she is normal." But she hated it. And she
mm,
would want to give up and say, "Why do I have to do this skill anyway?" But then once she had it, once she achieved the skill, she never lost it. It never went away after that. But there were just some skills that it took a long time to for her to even accomplish, not perfect, but even just to accomplish the first time. Now, there are lots of skills when you look at the difficulty of her routines now that, she did at this past Olympics. There are skills that she took years and years to learn, but that was
mm,
more of a safety measure and waiting until it was the right time to perform them. And that's a little bit different than the skills that she was learning when she was younger, those frustration
mm.
skills, some of the release moves on bars and things like that, that she struggled with because she was so tiny and, her little hands barely reached around the bars. And so that was aggravating for her. And bars, the only way to really learn to do bars is to do bars. And you have to do it
Mm.
over and over and over again. Vault, floor, balance beam, you can kind of work them all on the floor, which will help
Mhm.
you. But when you give up on bars, it's tough.
Mm. So I don't know if this was when she was in her early years or later on, but it seems like she had a bit of a rebellious streak, is the way I frame it, in the sense that sometimes she just wouldn't feel like training, so she would just sort of phone it in. If she was bored with something, she just wouldn't do it. So this is sort of going back to earlier in the conversation about you don't believe in tough love, because I'm guessing there are times when kids do sort of need, I mean, whatever the right phrasing is, tough love or something else, but also you don't want to be overly forceful with them and have them just not want to do it, to spite you. So I guess how do you coach through that? And let's just talk about Simone in particular, because she's such a savant, as you put it. How do you coach through that? How do you balance those?
So one thing I used to say to her frequently when she was in
Mm,
that kind of space, let's say, um, I would say, "Why are you being so mean to me? I'm just trying to help you." And so I would
mm,
kind of turn the tables on it. It's like instead of trying to like push back against her and me trying to be the person that was in charge, I had to allow her to have her space. I also had to allow her and give her a safe space to fail in. And, I think
mm,
that a lot of that came to fruition in 2013 when she hadn't been training well going into that elite season. And she had been a little defiant. She had, like you said, she'd come in and just kind of phone it in. She was there. She showed up. She wasn't skipping practice, but she wasn't being the gymnast she could be. And there was a bit of headbutting and stuff like that. But her other coach, Luis, and I just allowed her to have her teenage moments. And we're like, we'll see. We'll see how it comes out. And then when she went to competition and, in her repertoire, she had failed, like that competition
mm,
might have been great for somebody else, but it wasn't great for her. And
mm.
that's when she decided, oh, wait, this isn't how I want to feel after a competition. And so by allowing her that safe space to fail, she actually rose from it.
Mm. That's really interesting. So you're allowing her to be her own teacher in some sense. Like that's almost
Yes.
part of the coaching is to allow her to coach herself, huh?
So I think a huge part of it, and I think this is where coaches go wrong sometimes, is feeling like we have to be right because we are the masters. We are the
Mm,
masters of the sport. We have all of the knowledge. We've done it for years and years. We've been competitive ourselves. We've studied it. And so we feel like we always have to be right. But sometimes we can still be right without letting the athlete know that we're right and letting them figure it out on their own.
mhm.
And again, it's about creating that safe space for them to fail, that safe space for them to learn. Because I guarantee you that in those months, Simone learned more about being an adult and not being a defiant teenager. She learned that being
Mhm.
defiant wasn't going to help her gymnastics career. We didn't tell her she couldn't be defiant or she'd have to leave. Well, because then if she was defiant and was asked to leave practice, then she could blame her poor performance on the fact that she got kicked out of practice. Instead of, okay, stay here, perform poorly. Let's see how this turns out in competition for you.
Uh, yeah, it just to sort of take that thread and extend it a bit, that maturation process that she goes through, it also, I would think, shifts the focus from trying to please Coach Amy to trying to please myself, Simone Biles. Because
Yes,
now it's not you telling her what to do, it's her telling herself that she could have done better and can
exactly.
do better. Yeah,
Right.
super interesting.
And in Simone's gymnastics career, up through the time that I was coaching her, it was
Mhm,
always her choice. Her parents
mhm,
never forced her to do it. Her coaches never forced her to do it. So it was always left out there for her to make the decision on, like, maybe not the assignments in particular, but what she wanted the trajectory of her career to look like. And
mm,
her parents said, you can stop anytime. Like if she'd come home complaining, they'd say, then just quit. You don't have to do this.
mm,
When she was moving into the elite world and it was hard and it was stressful and all those things, I, as her coach and her other coaches would say, it's okay. You don't have to do elite if you don't want to. If you want to be a level 10 gymnast and go to UCLA and become a national champion at UCLA, you can do that. We're here for you, whatever you want to do. So there was never that outside pressure of you have to go this particular path.
Hmm. And and just to continue this theme, I think there's somewhere where you talk about how winning isn't really the focus. Maybe it is for Simone, but it didn't sound like it is for you, and you want her to not focus on the winning per se. And you sort of mentioned this notion of reframing the word to lose, losing, and that wrapping your identity and self-worth around the outcomes isn't a healthy thing to do. But rather, it's not always under your control. You can't control what the score is
Mm.
and how the others perform, but just focus on what's under your control. So it's a very interesting philosophy, one I've heard echoed a lot on this podcast with some people that actually have achieved world-class status in what they do. So, in terms of focusing what's under your control, what would that mean in the context of a gymnast? What should they be focused on? What would make you happy that they honed in on the right things?
So on the day to day, it is, are you taking care of your body? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating properly? Are you fueling your machine the way it should be fueled? So that's a very personal, accountable thing for them to take. Then are you listening to your coaches? Because coaches are truly there to help the athletes. I think that some coaches may take it in the wrong direction, but overall, that's why we coach, is to help raise these athletes to be great. And then on competition day, it's, are you applying those hours you've put into training into your competition? Did you come in with good attitude? Did you learn something from the experience? And if I circle back to that 2013 competition that didn't go so well, she learned something from that competition. It wasn't a great competition. It wasn't about what she did in the competition. It was about the lesson that she learned from that competition, and then where she wanted to go from there. So,
Mm.
because again, the gymnasts have no control over the score. They have no say in if the judge thinks that they were artistic enough. We have on floor, we have, I believe it's over a point. I think it's 1.4, 1.2 to 1.4 in deduction and potential deduction, just if the judges don't think that you are artistic enough.
Mm.
So, there are people who can wow judges, and then that same person can go to another competition with a different set of judges and get a completely different score. So it
Yeah,
really goes into, did you apply your training and do the best that you could?
yeah. So, is there a particular success story that comes to mind, something that you're really proud of that had nothing to do with standing on the podium? There wasn't a gold, maybe there wasn't a silver, maybe there wasn't any medal, maybe it was earlier, but something that was uh, maybe it was an inflection point for them, a turning point somehow, a lesson they learned, but something that made you feel really proud about what they did and what the takeaways were.
Um, I mean, there's so many. The reason I hesitate is because there are so many. There's so many of
Mm.
those little victories that happen and just make me smile. And sometimes it's just that they'll come up and be like, "Yeah, you were right, Coach Aimee." That's a win for me. 'Cause sometimes I just let them figure it out on their own, and they say that I was right. I do think that one of my most proud moments with Simone in particular, it didn't have to do with the win, but it was her third world championship that she went to. And it was about, yes, she did win that all around, but at the end of it, she came up to me and, said, did I do it? And it was about how she managed all of the stress and the pressure to be this three-peat world champion and the growth that she had to show and the trust that she had to put in the people around her to help get her to that championship. But it wasn't about the gold medal around her neck. It was about the process that it took to get there and all of these things a year out from the Olympics that had been thrown on her plate that she'd never had to deal with before. And so that was really, and that was the first time she had to deal with it. Whereas when she went to the Tokyo Olympics, she had been through that before. When she went to the Paris Olympics, she had been through that before. So she kind of understood the Olympic juggernaut and how to navigate it. But this was like her first time going through it. And it just made me so proud of how she had matured in that year.
Mm. So I've got a hypothetical for you.
Mm.
It's a hypothetical, so but just go with it. But let me sort of tee it up here a bit,
Okay.
and you can correct me where my assumptions might be wrong. But but I'm going to take a guess that when you have a superstar talent like Simone, to go from a 1 to an 8 out of 10,
Hmm.
whatever measurement that is, even a 1 to a 9, with Simone, pretty easy. And a lot of that to get from the 1 to the 8, 1 to the 9 as a gymnast is learning to do new things. Oh, how do I go from two twist to three twist, or one turn, two turns, three turns? I've mastered the balance beam. I got to do the floor now. And so you're constantly learning new routines, new techniques, new moves, et cetera, et cetera. But there's got to be a point, I would imagine, where now you've got all the basic moves, but now you got to perfect it. Now it's going from a 9 to a 10, or 9.5 to a 10. And I
Hmm.
imagine at that point, it becomes a lot less exciting, like, oh, a new routine, a new move, and much more laborious and monotonous, just to drive incremental improvements in having a tighter tuck or a more fluid this or that. So it, first of all, I guess, is that the case? And if so, how do you keep someone like that motivated? Because what if she, and here's the hypothetical for you, which is, what if she had come back to the point about, hey, it's not about the winning, it's not about the gold medal. What if she came and said, look, I love gymnastics, I enjoy what I do, and that it's no longer fun. I don't have what it takes to go from a 9.5 to a 10. It just seems like it's just death by a thousand cuts. I'm happy to go out there and enjoy myself and, I don't know, get the bronze, or maybe not even medal. Just, be good enough to be on the team, and nothing else. How would you have handled that kind of situation? Once again, balancing what she's capable of, because she's capable if she puts her heart, mind, and soul to getting the gold, but also it's got to be something that they want to do. Sorry, long wind up
Yeah. No, no,
question.
no.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, first of all, so the hypothetical, if she had come back and said, "Yeah, I really don't want to go from that 9 to a 10,"
Hmm.
it would have been fine. Like the world of gymnastics never would have known, well, now the global world would not have known Simone as they know her now, for sure. But that door was always open to her, and it was always about having fun. Like, again, not every day is going to be fun, but it has to be more worth it than not worth it. And so myself and her other coaches, we knew that we had to keep it fun for her. It had to be exciting for her. It had to be challenging for her. Because, yes, let's be real, Simone probably started at a 4 on that scale, 4 or 5 on that scale, right? And so by the time she got to a 9, it didn't take that long, right? So when she decided she wanted to do elite gymnastics and not level 10 gymnastics, she knew she was going to have to put in the time, the extra. I mean, that's right where we started. We started coming in, I think it was 3 extra hours a week just to work on her flexibility, straightening her knees, pointing her feet, all of that, the
Yeah.
arduous tasks, the things that you don't want to do. And she wanted to do it because she knew that she wanted to do elite gymnastics. So as that got better and she got more used to doing that, and then she would
Mhm.
start adding in other things. And there were monotonous days. There were days that I didn't want to do it. There were days I was bored with it. So, but when you do have a great talent like Simone, you have this opportunity to create new skills and new challenges, things that aren't in the code of points. things that no one has ever competed before. So that also kept it interesting as a coach
Mm.
and for her as an athlete. So, but I think that the biggest thing always goes back to she didn't have to do it, she chose to do it. And that is part of her longevity. And yeah, being the coach of a superstar athlete, remember, she wasn't a superstar when I started coaching her. So there was a lot, even though she was super talented, there was a lot of there was physical training that had to go in, there was mental training, there was emotional training that had to go into all of this, to learn how to not give up when something was hard, all of those things that helped her become a superstar. But we both had to put in the time to make that happen. And at any moment, she could have been like, I'm done with gymnastics, I'm going to go run track. And we never would have known the Simone Biles we know today if that had
Right.
happened.
Well, and then maybe you become a track coach. Yeah. And then we'll have a
My
different
heart's in the
story.
gym.
Um, I want to, I don't want to be a dead horse here, but it's just such an interesting concept, the notion of not focusing on the goal, on winning, on the podium, because it's been a recurring theme so much on this podcast. I mean, I could rattle off, honestly, probably 50 or 60 examples. Cindy Timchaw was the winningest lacrosse women's coach ever in history, 7 championships in a row. Told her team to never look at the scoreboard. Don't look at it. Doesn't matter. George Mumford, who is Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant's whisperer, told Kobe the way you score more points is don't focus on scoring more points. On and on and on. But ironically, Amy, is by not focusing on the outcome, these people, these high achievers, are often able to actually achieve those very outcomes that they weren't focused on. So it ends up happening anyway. So do you have a theory on why that is?
Because the anxiety of failure is gone, because they haven't set this expectation for themselves that they have to get a certain score, that they have to score a certain number of points, and so they can just let their talent and their training kind of take over. And there's something like so freeing about that, that it's like, yeah, if you're Michael Jordan and you're just making the shot, you're just making the shot, right? You're not worried about making sure you hit, your triple doubles. It's not that's not what it's about. That's not what sport is
Mm.
about. And so I think athletes just get to be athletes. Just like if we have an open gym and the kids just start playing, they suddenly can do way more than they can do when they're practicing, because in practice they're worried about failing. When
Mhm.
they're at open gym, they're just having fun. They're being free.
Mm. So it removes all the anxiety, which creates tension, which then has you focus on being just perfect, which then makes you too tight, which then has you. It's a really interesting idea. Um,
I hadn't
I
thought
think
of it
some,
before, but it makes
yeah.
total sense to me.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, because I'm telling you, across every kind of domain I've come across, it seems to be the recurring theme over and over. Someone who was the first ever black chess grandmaster, he couldn't get that last level, and until he learned to basically stop focusing on becoming a chess grandmaster and just learn to play the game, which seems so obvious, but it's not. And he did, and then he became a grandmaster. It's really interesting. Well,
Well,
Simone,
I
yeah.
think something that I can relate it to right now
Mm,
is that, so I'm living in Germany, and obviously I'm learning German, and I am great practicing my German at home. Like, my pronunciation is great, my word order is great. Like, you'd think I could speak German. And I'll go to the store and I'll walk up and I'm like, I know what I'm going to ask this person, and it's in my brain perfectly. And then I get up there and I freeze and I panic and I can't speak German all of a sudden. So even though I can read
mm,
it perfectly, I can read
mhm,
everything on the shelf, I know what it is, I can't ask if someone can help me find something because I panic because I'm worried about failing. I'm worried about embarrassing myself. And so I'm
mm.
sure it's exactly the same way for the athletes, about letting somebody down.
Yeah. And how about when you're actually about to perform? I mean, some of this is just more general advice as you're training, as you're going into a competition. But when you're sitting there and they're about to, whatever, blow the whistle and here you go, and there's millions. I don't know how many people watch the Olympics around the world. I mean,
Millions.
tens of millions, hundreds of. So when you're in a high stakes situation and you've got to perform at your best, right then in the moment, is there any technique that you teach them to not let the nerves get the better of you?
So one thing that we did a lot before Rio, especially like in the year leading up to Rio, whenever the
Mm,
national team would get together, um, they focused on one word, and it was normal. It's just normal. It's
mm,
normal practice. It's normal routine. It doesn't matter what the distractions around you are. You just do normal. And I know that's not a great English right there, but that's what they would say. Just do normal. And that meant like just focusing on yourself and your training. And it seemed to level all of them out when the crowds are cheering and the cameras are in their face and all of that. They were able to just focus in on what was normal, what had been normal for them for the last couple of years.
and does normal mean, for example, are they uh, are they going through the routines in their head, like start to finish, and mentally mapping it out? Are they doing slow breathing exercises? Are they meditating? Is there anything they're doing beyond just knowing that, hey, don't think of this as anything beyond just a normal routine? What actually gets them into that quote unquote normal? What is normal in
Yeah,
terms of
I
like,
think that's
yeah.
yeah, I think that's very individual for each athlete.
Hmm.
What's normal for one is different for another. Some may want to go sit in a quiet corner with their eyes closed and meditate. Some might want to go through the routine in their head. Some might want to mark the routine. One thing that was normal for Simone was before she competed, she was cheering for other people. She was watching the competition for enjoyment purposes, not to scope out her competition.
Mm,
But, she could see an athlete from another country across the arena, struggling to do something, and she's cheering them on. And she's up
mm,
next to compete on another event. And so that actually helped put her in the zone because she wasn't sitting there in her mind worrying about if she was going to fail somehow or if she was going to let somebody down. She was
mm.
relaxed. She was able to maybe distract herself enough so she wasn't sitting there in her nerves. And then once she started, it was just go time, and she just let her training take over.
It's I can't think of too many people that would do something like that. Cheer on their opponents, and it was all genuine. I'm sure. I don't think there was
100%.
any fucking. So I think the world got introduced back to this twisties idea, this concept of the twisties, as you were alluding to earlier, when Simone came down with them really suddenly at the Tokyo Olympics and had to withdraw from the competition. But it wasn't the first time that it happened for Simone. It was just the first time that we saw it. I think it happened the first time maybe 6 months or so before the Rio Games. And those were the first games, I believe, that she went into that you were coaching her and where she took away all these golds. So maybe just go back to starting with here's what the twisties are. And then how do you diagnose what's behind it and what kind of corrective actions, if any, that you can take?
So, what the twisties are, some people like to equate them to getting like the yips in baseball or golf, but the big difference is that when a golfer swings a club and they shank the ball, nobody gets hurt unless somebody's standing off on the side and gets hit by the ball. Or a baseball player, same thing. It can be embarrassing for that athlete, a professional athlete, if they're not
Mm,
performing, but nobody's really getting hurt. When that happens to a gymnast, basically you lose all of your perception about where your body is in the air. And as I said
mm,
earlier, her being an air sense savant, that's a huge thing for her. Her
mm,
difficulty is so high that if she loses her air awareness, it can be
mm,
catastrophic. So, why it happens, we don't really know. And I am not one to diagnose it. I can only speak from my experience about what I have witnessed and how I dealt with it. Um, I think that when pressure builds from the outside and they don't know what to do with it, the brain just shuts down. You know, your body goes into, you have your fight, flight, or freeze. And in that moment, the brain freezes. And it doesn't necessarily have to be from an incident that has happened. Like
Mm.
having a panic attack. You could be
Yeah.
completely calm in the moment and you think you're calm, and all of a sudden you start having chest pains. And I can speak to this because this happened to me. I was driving home from work one
Mm.
day and I was totally relaxed and everything. And I started having awful chest pains, and I called my doctor and he brought me in and he did an EKG and everything was fine. And he said, "You just had a panic attack." And I was like, "How did I have a panic attack? I was totally calm." And he was like, "Well, you have all of this going on in your life." I was like, "Oh, yeah, I do, but I was
Mm.
calm." So
Mm.
if I bring that back to the twisties, the gymnast might not actually have any like cognizant reality of the fact that they're carrying all of these stressors on them. Because in that moment, they can be like, "I want to do this. I want to make my body do this." And the
Mm.
brain says, "Nope, the body is not going to do this right now."
What do you do?
Well, what I did was I said, "Okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to take a step back and you're going to tell me when you're ready." And every day she would come in the gym and I would say, "Okay, do you want to try today?" And she's like, "Well, I'll see." And she would like do her lead up skills to something that was a bigger skill. And she would say, "Nope, not today." And slowly it just built on. And, you know, it would be like two steps forward, one step back sometimes. And some days she could twist off of one event, but not on the other events. So sometimes it had to do with how she was entering the airspace that made her more comfortable than others. But honestly, one day we kept doing that, and one day it just went away.
Mm.
And
I mean,
I knew
it
she
says
wasn't going to forget how to do gymnastics in that
it says
time.
a lot about you, honestly, as a coach, right? Because it's a much gentler and understanding and perhaps empathetic approach that a lot of coaches wouldn't have done. A lot of coaches, back to the main coaches, I'll bet the coach that you had when you were a kid, they wouldn't have had the patience. I mean, you're T minus 6 months from the most important thing that they've ever done in their life. Time is of the essence. This is no time to get the twisties, snap back, into it. And they would have pushed and pushed as hard as they could to get them to overcome it, which probably would have absolutely backfired. So it's there's no question here as much as a comment, which is it speaks volumes to you as a coach in terms of your approach and your philosophy, and obviously how that landed with Simone, which is very positive. So,
Yeah, because her well-being was always more important than the gymnastics.
mm. I mean, it takes it's easy in hindsight because it all worked out. I'm sure that must be hard to some degree to trust yourself, you as a coach now, to trust your inner conviction, your belief, your values, your coaching philosophy, to go against the grain of the prevailing coaching wisdom out there and just do what you feel is right. And it
That
sounds like you said you were coaching since you were 13, so I guess this is just something that has always been a part of you.
Yeah, that moment in time might have been when I had that panic attack.
Please say that.
But you know,
At least you kept it on
all
the
jokes
inside.
aside, yeah, all jokes aside, there was a lot of pressure on me about everybody knew that I had this incredible talent under my tutelage, and all it would take would be one bad decision to ruin
Mm.
her. And so
Yeah.
that always sat heavy on my shoulders, that
Mm.
I had to make the right decision for her, because people would say, "Well,
Mm.
oh yeah, either Aimee wasn't good enough of a coach to get her to be the best gymnast she could be and get her to the Olympics, or Aimee pushed her too hard and she got injured or burnt out." And, so it's Aimee's fault, Aimee's fault, Aimee's fault. So, I mean, yeah, like you said, in hindsight, it's good because it all worked out. But in those moments, I didn't know if it was going to work out. I just had to trust that no matter what, I was doing the right thing for Simone in the big
Mm.
picture as a
Yeah.
person.
Over the course, how many years did you coach her?
12.
12 years. Any moments over the 12 years where your relationship with her was tested?
Um,
I mean, really tested.
I don't think so. I mean, I think a lot of that had to do, I mean, she was young and she was immature, but a lot of that had to do with her parents and the trust that they put into me.
Mhm.
They entrusted me with her and her sister's training, and that was very important because they never questioned my methodology or my motives with her. So I think that that really helped. I think, the most straining part of our relationship was probably after I left. She was retiring at that time, and I left and moved to Florida. And I know that that was really hard for her because I had been a staple in her life for so long. And even though she, at that point, was going to be retiring, I know that she was still young and felt like I probably abandoned her. But to
Mm.
me, my whole thing was this is a natural process in life. Like people move forward with their lives. And I missed her. I missed her a lot because I
Mm.
had been with her every day for so many years. But also, like, I wanted to turn our relationship into this adult relationship now, to where if she
Mhm.
came back to the gym, I was still there for her and that I would always be there for her. I'm always in her corner. And that it would be okay if she trained with other coaches. And, that if she needed a sounding board, I would be her sounding board. But I would
Mm.
also support her new coaches if she chose to come back. And so, I want people to see like that's okay. You don't have to have a strained relationship just because you're not coaching someone anymore. And that tends to happen, especially in youth sports,
Mhm.
where someone will change gyms and then the relationship is ruined.
Mm.
And so I didn't want that to happen. And sometimes money comes into play, and there have been athletes, gymnasts that have been offered endorsements and things like that, and their coaches have made them sign contracts that the coach gets part of the money for the endorsement. And
Mhm.
I didn't do that, and I didn't do that specifically because the relationship, money ruins relationships, right? So
Mhm.
the relationship with Simone and her family was more important to me than money ever would be.
Mm. I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you ready?
Do I have to answer?
If you don't have to answer, if you had never crossed paths with this little 6-year-old girl, Simone, someone else found her, someone else was going to take her under their wing, someone else was going to try to coach her to greatness. Do you think she still would have become the goat that she is?
I think if someone had had the methodology and temperament that I have, yes. I think a more demanding coach would have driven her out of the sport. And there are lots of coaches that have known Simone her whole life that say she never would have lasted a week in my gym. That she's not a fall in line kind of athlete, and those are fall in line kind of coaches.
Hmm. It, as you've coached others beyond Simone, did you find that, oh gosh, there were so many of these coaching tactics that were so effective with Simone because of who she is and how she's wired, but they completely fall flat with these others? Were you having to sort of relearn your own coaching, bag of tricks, if you will?
Yeah, I definitely think I am, but I'm gonna turn that a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Because when I am working with new athletes now, I am looking at the way that they were treated by their previous coaches. And so I feel like there may be some emotional things that need to be undone so that these young ladies can actually learn how to communicate properly and see the benefit of having a say in what their training looks like instead of just being dictated to all the time. Because a lot of athletes are just used to being dictated to. And I like to be collaborative with my athletes. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have a master plan. I absolutely have a master plan. But involving them makes them more accountable about what they're doing. And sometimes, yeah, you have to. they have to unlearn what they previously learned about what training should look like. So
Mm.
I do a bit of that, but then yes, there also are athletes who I don't know. I don't know if they prefer to be spoken sternly to, because I don't
Mhm.
think anybody likes to be spoken sternly to. I feel that's more the way they've been programmed. Like, because if I put myself back in my athlete shoes, okay, when I was a little girl doing gymnastics, and all I ever wanted was the approval of my coaches. So
Mhm.
if the only way for me to get approval was to answer their demands, in a physical way in the gym, um, then I would find a way to do that. And they had me convinced that if they were yelling at me, it's because they cared about me. Okay. But we know that that's abuse. You know, in the 80s, we didn't know that that was abuse. But now we know that that is abuse. And so I don't think that yelling at anybody is is the way to go. And along with that, there's the opposite side of that, of the yelling that's abusive. The stonewalling is also abusive, because it's manipulative. And to me, it's like, let's just talk about this and let's see what's best for the athlete. When it comes down to it, it does not matter what is best for me. I don't do this job for me. I do this job for my athletes. Coaching and seeing an athlete grow and mature and succeed, whatever success looks like to them, that is completely up to them. But me helping nurture that is why I do it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, just reflecting. I mean, I think if they do it for the right reasons, they'll be a lot more resilient and what's the right word here? They'll once they go to life beyond gymnastics, which happens at a pretty young age, you sort of have the rest of your life.
Right.
So how do you make sure that you've developed that inner compass, if you will, so you can find your own North Star, not doing it for a teacher, a coach, a parent, doing it for yourself. So I think a lot of what you did with Simone and with others wasn't just good in terms of how it allowed them to find themselves and become the greatest athlete they could, but probably tools they use throughout their lives as they have to continue to navigate, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Mm.
love when my former gymnasts put their children in gymnastics because they want them to learn and experience the way that they did and get the value out of doing sports and especially gymnastics that they want that for their children.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we've come to the last question. It's the
Okay.
same last question they all have. And the podcast is called The Art of Excellence. And I enjoy hearing how my guests define that word excellence. So when you think of the word, how do you interpret it? What does it mean to you?
I think that excellence is finding out what your success looks like and then taking every step that you can to pursue that because everybody's metric of success is different and
Mhm.
how you get there might be different, but just pushing yourself to reach that level of success is, I think, what produces excellence.
Mm, that's great. I'll take it.
All right.
I will take that one. Well,
Or you want a new one? I
I
can do it again.
no, no, no. I love it. Look, you are lucky to have had Simone and find her. She is super lucky to have had you find her and have you as her coach because I can just tell the way you approach your athletes, the way you approach coaching, that relationship, uh, you don't take that trust for granted, and you treat them well, and you do care about them, and it's really nice to hear when coaches don't just have the kind of ultimate outcomes like you've had with Simone, but when they did it the right way, the healthy way. I think it's great to hear that, and it's one of the big reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast. So um, I know it was hard to make this work with the logistics. thank you for doing this. Really enjoyed it, Aimee.
Thank you. I had a great time. Thank you for having me on.